So you may remember last time we were discussing, it was a Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai machlokas. According to Tosfos, this is one of the 6 times where we actually passed them like Beis Shammai instead of Beis Hillel. But we weren't clear what we were discussing, what they were arguing about. Was it over a very small sukkah? And Beis Shammai says that the person has to be able to fit their head, majority of their body, and their table in the sukkah. Whereas Beis Hillel said, no, as long as they can fit in the sukkah, it doesn't matter. As long as it's 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, even if you can't fit a table in there, it's still kosher. Or are we arguing about a large sukkah? So it wasn't about the dimensions of the sukkah, it was merely about the dynamics of the sukkah, should we say, rather than dynamics rather than dimensions. That if a person is sitting in their sukkah, but they're sitting at the entrance of the sukkah, and their table is in the house, mostly in the house, maybe some of it just into the sukkah. Beis Shammai said, no, the sukkah is possible. Or really, what he meant was lo yatsa. We said that actually the Mishnah we had should actually have an additional words in it for us to be able to understand it, and it would be that not that the sukkah is possible because the sukkah is a perfectly large sukkah, but Beis Shammai would say that the person was lo yatsa, wouldn't have the obligation if even in a large sukkah where their table is in their house, because he was concerned, Beis Shammai are concerned that a person goes after the table, and since the table is in the house, they would then end up eating over the table, which would be in the house, and therefore, lo yatsa, they wouldn't have fulfilled their obligation, even though it's perfectly kosher sukkah. Okay, we then saw 2 brises. Evening, Johnny. We then saw.
Good evening.
We saw 2 brises quoting Rebbe, and you'll see if again I can move up here and show you. Rebbe seemed to have a completely different consideration. It says the Mishnah. Says the Gemara. V'atanya, so we've learned in the brisa. Mechazekes rosha v'rubo v'shulchano keshera. We have a brisa that says if the sukkah is large enough to accommodate a person's head, body, and table, then it's kosher. Rebbe Omer, whereas Rebbe said, no, until the sukkah is a minimum of 4 amos by 4 amos, is not kosher. But Tanya Idach, and it's similarly taught in another brisa, Rebbe Omer calls sukkah she'ein ba'arba amos al arba amos b'sulah. Rebbe says quite explicitly, any sukkah which isn't 4 amos by 4 amos is possible. Whereas the Chachamim would say, even if it only can accommodate the person's head and majority of their body without the table, says clearly Beis Hillel, so interestingly, we see that according to Rebbe would say that a sukkah which is not a minimum of 4 amos by 4 amos is possible. So having said that, let's go down to where we were up to. So says the Gemara, Man Tana Lahad Tana Rabbanan. Who would this brisa go according to that was taught by the rabbis? Bayis she'ein bo arba amos al arba amos. A house which is smaller than daled amos squared, Potter min mezuzah, is exempt from mezuzah. Interesting halacha. Says Rashi, why would you think a house which is smaller than daled amos by daled amos would be possible from a sukkah? Says Rashi, up here, it's further back up the page. Kula mefarish taimo lekaman. Everything will be explained later on, says Rashi in the Gemara. Yeah, so Rashi is enormous. There's a question. Why? Why does it need to be? It's quite a big size. 6 by 6. You know, a room in a house doesn't need to be 6 by 6 for it to have a mezuzah on it. Why would a house have to be 4 by 4? Why does a house have to be 4 by 4 amos for it to have a mezuzah? Says Rashi, the Gemara will explain. So for the moment, we have a brisa that says that a house which is smaller than daled amos squared does not need a mezuzah. Who do we think this might go like? Rebbe, right? Rebbe seems to say a sukkah which isn't 4 by 4 is possible. Perhaps he would also say that a house which is not 4 by 4 is potter from mezuzah. Similarly, umin hamakeh, also this house would be potter from market. This house would not require a guardrail around a flat roof. Ve'ena, the Sefer Rashi. There's no Rashi on this, I don't think. No. Ve'ena metame benegayim. Similarly, it couldn't become tame benegayim, meaning negasaras, meaning we know that saras can afflict both a person, clothes, and a house. The walls of a house can become afflicted by negasaras. And says the Brisa, only if that house is larger than 4 by 4 amos. Next thing, nor would a house of this small proportions be irreversibly sold in a walled city. Now, look, this you have to look at Rashi. There's a special halacha in relation to houses in walled cities in Eretz Yisrael. Says Rashi. I'll go back up here. It's back up here. It's in here. Ve'ena nechlat, says Rashi. Ve'ena nechlat ela pedu le'olam. So a house, it says that according to the Torah, a house in a walled city has a special halacha in it. If you sell it, then the owner of that house has a year in which to redeem it. But if not, then he can never redeem it. Says the Brisa, that only applies to a house which is daladamas by daladamas. If not, then it's not irreversibly sold. Ela pedui la'olam, meaning even if the person, the owner, original owner, doesn't redeem it within the first year of sale, he can always redeem it. V'yotze b'yovel, and it would automatically revert to its original owner at the yovel of the Jubilee. Whereas under normal circumstances, according to the Torah, the original owner only has a year with which to redeem it, and if he doesn't, then it's not revert. It doesn't revert to him at Yovel. However, a house smaller than 4 by 4 would. Says Rashi, so it would revert. So he can always rebuy it, and it would revert to him automatically at Yovel, even if he hadn't redeemed it, like any other type of land that doesn't have a building on it. So the normal rules of land would apply to it if it doesn't have a house which is 4 by 4 on it. Back in the Gemara.
So it's as though it's a piece of land, in other words, and not necessarily a house.
Yeah, the house, that's a good point. I think that's what the point Rashi's saying, is Rashi's saying it's just treated like karka. It's treated like land. It has a very small, insignificant building on it, but it's not significant enough for it to have the halacha of the din of
a house.
Of
a house.
Yeah, of a house, and therefore it wouldn't. The halachas of nechlat wouldn't apply to it, meaning it could always be bought back by its original owner. He hasn't got the 1 year limit, and it would automatically revert to them anyway at Yovel, whereas normally it wouldn't if it was in a walled city. Carry on in the Gemara. And soldiers, and it wouldn't, a house like this wouldn't return soldiers from war. Again, the Torah tells us that special halacha about a person who is either just got married, planted a vineyard, built a new house. These types of people are exempt from military service because the Torah says this person's going to be worried that if they go off to war and they've only got a new vineyard, someone else is going to come in and tend it. If they've only just got married and they go off to war, then someone's going to come and chap their wife. And similarly, if they've got a new house, then also someone's going to come and take it away from them if they're not there. And since their mind's not on the job, so we say, and they're going to be thinking about other things, it's much better that we exempt them from military service. Says the Brisa, that would only apply to a house which is Daled Amos by Daled Amos. A house smaller than that, this wouldn't apply. Okay? Okay, that's the next halakha. Next halakha is penultimate line. Vein ma'arvim boy, and we don't make an eruv with it. Says Rashi, what type of eruv are we talking about here? Look at Rashi. So actually, go back to the previous one. So we're talking about soldiers. It wouldn't be told soldiers. It says that Rashi quotes the Pasuk in the Torah. Person who builds a new house, they would be exempt from military service. The next thing is, we do not make an eruv with it. Says Rashi, derech batehem. So I'm looking back in my Gemara now. Yeah. Derech batehem lios ptuchim lechatzer. We saw this actually right at the beginning. Do you remember? And the way the houses were constructed in Talmudic times, well, perhaps even other times as that. Particularly, you see this in France as well, still to this day. That the houses used to open out into a communal courtyard. They were built around a square. So the houses would open out into this communal courtyard. And many houses could open onto this one courtyard. And the people who lived in those houses would have to come out of their house into the courtyard, shared courtyard, and from that courtyard they would go to the alleyway into the main street. Now, what's the issue? That you can't carry from one rishus to another. The house is the rishus hayachid, even though the courtyard isn't a rishus harabim because it doesn't have a din rishus harabim because it's not big enough, nor does it have enough people going through it, and it's also enclosed. It doesn't have the din of rishus hayachid because it's jointly used by everybody else. So you have a problem on Shabbos. So what's the resolution? Says Rashi. Says Rashi. We find that this courtyard is a shared domain. Whereas each house is specific to its owner. Chachamim tell us you can't go from one domain to another. Without an eruv, meaning we know what an eruv means, but literally it means something which mingles, which joins together these private houses and the courtyards. Which joins together all of these different domains to become one domain. V'tiknulitin called bias ubayis shebachatzer pas. So the Chachamim instituted, okay, you want to be able to use this courtyard on Shabbos. Then what you have to do is this. Each house has to donate some bread. V'chulan b'sal echad, and everyone puts it into one basket. Manichim oso be'echa min habatim, and then they place it in one house. V'na'asim kulam ki'ilu darin ba'oso bayis. And therefore, that makes it as if everybody is dwelling in that one house. And all the houses are like one house. Because if you're putting some of your food in someone else's house, that house becomes an extension of your own house. And then everything else, and the courtyard as well. And we're learning from here that a house which isn't 4 by 4 amas, not only would it not be included in this, but a person who lived in such a small house wouldn't have to donate to this eruv. Yeah, because there's no din of a bias for this house, and therefore there's no need to join this non-house with the other houses. Okay.
So he would stand on his own. He wouldn't be part of the chevra, of the chatzer, the combined chatzer. Then he'd be completely separated from the rest of his group.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Whether the shadow would be whether this person who lives in this tiny little house would be able to carry in the rishus, in the chatzer. It would appear on the face of it that he would be able to. There's no need for him to make an eruv. Why? Because his house isn't considered significant enough for it to be part of this joint development. All right. He's living in the smallest house on the street, and everyone's looking down on this person, right? Okay. So that's the next thing. bottom line of the Gemara, V'ein mishtatefin boy. Similarly, we don't make a shituf. We say this is shituf mavoris. Look at Rashi again. I'll show you where it is. V'ein mishtatefin, says Rashi, shetiknu chachamim al kol chatze ha'betucha lemavoy. Now we're talking about the alleyway. So we said that each house opens out onto the courtyard. And from this courtyard, there's an alleyway that everybody uses. There's only one alleyway out of this courtyard that takes you into the Rishus HaRabim, the main street. So here, Chachamim instituted that for every, I'll call Chatzeh HaBetucha Lemavoy, that every courtyard that opens onto this alleyway, so there could be other courtyards that open onto it. So you can have a way, so you can have, for example, a square with a courtyard, and somewhere between the houses there'll be an alleyway leading out into the street. There could be another square of houses also with a courtyard, and that courtyard also can share the same alleyway that leads out into the street. You come out of that courtyard and there's an alleyway. It could be two, one on either side. You could have two courtyards on either side of an alleyway, each opening onto this alleyway and coming out onto the street. So says Rashi, the Chachamim instituted that for each chatzeh which opens onto the alleyway, like the instituted as we just saw for all houses that open out onto courtyards, that each person or each chatzeh, so it would be like a joint committee, would make a donation to join. Shituf means to make shituf means a partnership. To join, have a joint stake in this alleyway. But if this small house, less than 4 amas square, opens onto this chatzeh, which then opens onto this alleyway, and no other house opens onto it, you do not make a shituf with this house. Why? With this chatzeh as well. Because there's no need to, because it doesn't have any significance. The small house and its chatzeh do not have a significance, and therefore there's no need to join together with it in order to have shared right of way on the Shabbos into this mavoi. Remember, we talked about mavoi in the very first Mishnah. Remember, we talked about the lechi on the mavoi. We talked about the Mishnah said about let's remind ourselves. The Mishnah talked about we said mavoi should gavoa esrim amma. We talked about why did the Mishnah say that a sukkah which is esrim amma high, 20 ammas high, is possible? Why don't we just say a sukkah which is 20 ammas high, reduce it, which we did say with the mavoi. We said with the lechi and the mavoi, in order to the lechi can be a mavoi can be used on Shabbos, you have to put a lechi, a pole up against it in order people recognize that they're about to leave a quasi Rosh Hashayachid and go into the Rosh Hasharabim. We said if they put the lechi across, the beam going across above 20 ammas, it's no good because we don't look up. But we said, just the Mishnah said there, bring it down. So that's what we knew about the mavoi. Okay, so that's the next thing. A mishtatfim boy. Next thing is, and right last few words on the page. Ve'ein manichim bo eruv. Nor do we place the eruv in that house. So this house, this opens onto a courtyard. All the other houses collect up the bread. Where should we put it? I know. Let's put it in the small house. No, says the Brisa, you can't put it in that small house. Look at Rashi, the final Rashi on the page. Ve'ein manichim bo eruv. Hachatze la'achash shigabot oso min habatim. Shigabot min habatim. Sorry. You don't place the eruv in this house of this courtyard, and once you collected them from all the other houses, that's not the right house to put it in. Why? Because this house is eruv doesn't apply to this house, and therefore you can't place the eruv in this house. Okay, if we turn over.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
In a courtyard, what happens if some of the people don't join in the eruv?
Sorry, your volume is very low. I think I heard what you said.
So I was just saying, what happens if in the courtyard or the houses around the courtyard, not everyone joins the Eruv? So if there are 10 houses and 6 give and 4 don't, is that still kosher then?
Yes.
The 6, or does everyone need to?
Yeah. Everyone should, but if everyone doesn't, then it's still okay. The Eruv still works.
Okay, but you can't have 2. You couldn't have 5 in one house and 5 in the other.
5 or what? Sorry.
5 contributing bread and putting it in one house, and the other 5 if there's a dispute between neighbours.
Interesting.
Don't hold by the Eruv, right?
So I don't like that Eruv. We want our own Eruv. No, I think it will still work. It will still work because as long as they've got together and they're sharing it and they're placing it in, then it would work.
So it doesn't have to be a minyan or anything. It just is any number of houses together who make an agreement.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. So we turn over 1 second. If I just need to do the next thing, how do I do this? Next onward. Okay, so no, the ein osin next. Brisa continues. Ben osin also ibo ben shtei arios. Similarly, you can't use this house as an ibur between two cities. Now, ibur means pregnant. So this means a protrusion. So look at Rashi. It's quite a complex idea. We know to give an overview. We know that on Shabbos there's an idea of tchum, of boundaries, that even without an Eruv, a person can walk, obviously not carrying, but you can only walk a certain distance. It's 2,000 amas. You can only walk 2,000 amas beyond the city limits. So once habitation stops, you can only walk 2,000 amas in any direction from the edge of the city. However, there is a way of extending that tchum by placing something, again, this could be food or a building, just short of 2,000 amas in any direction, which will then extend the tchum for another 2,000 amas beyond it. Okay? Now, what about using this house? Now, so that's a similar idea. Look at Rashi. That's a basic idea. Says Rashi, top left-hand corner, Vein osin oso ibo ben shtei arios. Says Rashi, Desnan b'meseches Eruvin. This is really a din in Eruvin. Notice the Mishnah there says, Nosin karpaf l'shtei arios. Now, this is a karpaf is a plot of land that is normally used for storing things in, like firewood and things like that. Now that could be used, that piece of land which is enclosed could be used as this ibur, as this protrusion which could extend the tchum. Now this karpach is 70 and 2/3 amas squared. Now that's a significant number we'll see in a minute, but 70 and 2/3. Look how Rashi does it, tells us. In yesh nazu shivim amma v'shirayim. 70 amas and shirayim means remainder. Shirayim, if you ever go to a Hasidic tish, the Rebbe will eat, and then his plate will be passed around what's known as shirayim. It's a big schus to take something off the Rebbe's plate. It's very un-English sort of thing to do. It's a very Hasidic thing to do. It's called shirayim, what remains on his plate. Yeah? And so this idea of shirayim really is used fractions here. It means shtei shlish, 2/3. Whatever remains of a fraction. Ulazu shivim amar v'shirayim. So you've got 70 by 70 and 2/3 amas by 70 by 2/3 amas. Osek karpaf. You can make this karpaf, this block of land, l'shteihem, for both cities. So you've got two cities which are apart by 70. We'll see 141 amas and a third, which is 70 by 70, right? 70 and 2/3 times by 2. It's 140 and a third. I think I've got that right. 141 and a third. Yeah, Rashi tells it, so you'll see in a second. Yeah, you recall it's called the fourth wide line of Rashi. Kufmem Aleph Amos B'Shlish. 141 Amos and a third is 2 times 70 and 2/3. Yeah, good. So yeah, so you can make this kappa from the third line. L'shteihem lios achnas shtei arias. And for these two cities, to join these two cities, which are 141 and a third amas apart, you can join them with a plot of land which is 70 and 2/3 amas squared, which will then extend. Now what you've done is you haven't even now started the tzuchum, because you've gone from, let's say you've gone from your city limits with it now adding on the car path, which joins you to the next city, yeah, which was 141 and a third amas away. That takes you all the way through to that other city, go all the way to the other end of that city, and then the tchum would start. So you're really extending the tchum by means of this car path. V'yesh be'empsa bias. So right, says Rashi, fourth line of Rashi. What happens if, rather than this plot of land, you've got a house that's 70 and 2/3 amas distance from the city? But of Shivim Amah within 70 amas and 4 tefachim, l'shteim of the two cities. Nase also bias ki'ibu lehen. We can make this house the protrusion, the extension, ki'isha ubra shikuresha boletes. Why is it called ibur? Because it's like an isha ubara, a pregnant woman whose stomach protrudes beyond her frame. Yeah, and this protrusion in the land of just a house at this distance joins the two cities together. That you could actually stay over in either of the cities. When they are both 4 amas, umona alpayim mechutza lehen, and then you can start counting 2,000 amas from them. So I said, basically what you've done is you've joined together these two cities, which were 141 and a third amas apart, which would mean, and therefore you've now joined them. You can go freely between them, free travel between them on Shabbos. And your tchum doesn't start until you get to the boundary of the second city. So you've got masses now of distance you can travel. However, says Rashi, the imiyesh bias pachus midarat amos einu chashuv b'tzarfan. If the house at 70 and 2/3 amas away from the city is less than 4 amas squared, then it can't be used. It can't be considered sufficient to join the two cities together. Okay, so that's the next thing in the Mishnah. Okay, sorry, in the Brisa. Go back in the Brisa. One final thing, says the Brisa, Veina achim v'ashutfin cholkin boy. And a house of this tiny dimensions, brothers and partners can't divide it up. There's no way that there's a dispute amongst brothers. They say, okay, right, we own this house jointly. Let's say it was a Yerusha, it was a shared inheritance, or it was a joint partnership investment, and then they want to dissolve the investment, or the brothers want to divide up this house between them. You can't do it with a house this small, okay? Because each one we're going to, as we'll see, because each one will be left for something which is not worth anything. It's not anything. Look at Rashi. The ina achim or a shutfin v'cholkim boy. Neither one can force each other. One brother can't force the other brother, nor one partner can't force the other brother. To divide it. Because when you divide up a house which is that small, neither of them get anything which is worth anything. Yeah, a house, a share in a house which is less than 4 amas squared is not worth anything. Therefore, you couldn't force somebody to split their share in that. Okay. So, all those halachas are in one brisa. Our original question was, who does this brisa go according to? Yeah. Who would we say this is most aligned to in terms of this idea that a house less than 4 amas and 4 amas, certain things don't apply to it? What would we say? Says the Rashi, says the Gemara, Lema, Rebbe. Let's say that this brisa follows the opinion of Rebbe. Why would it be like the opinion of Rebbe? Look at Rashi. Lema Rebbe. Because Rebbe was the one who said, unless a sukkah is dalad amas by dalad amas, it's not kosher. It's not significant. Unless you get something minimum size of 4 by 4, it's no good. So here we see a brisa which says a house which is less than 4 by 4, a number of halachas that would normally apply to houses don't apply to this type of house. So it would seem quite logical to say this brisa reflects the opinion of Rebbe that since Rebbe says that a sukkah which is less than 4 by 4 isn't considered to be a sukkah, then it would be likely that he would say that a house this is less than 4 by 4 is not considered to be a house. Says the Gemara. Name a Rebbe and not the rabbis, not the Chachamim, because the Chachamim said when it came to the sukkah that as long as you can get your head and your body in the sukkah, it's kosher. Look at Rashi. We saw them when they said a sukkah is kosher. They said a sukkah smaller than 4 by 4 is considered to be a dira, a dwelling. Therefore, they would presumably say, also, all matters pertaining to houses would also apply to a house which is less than 4 by 4. If they hold that a sukkah less than 4 by 4 is still considered to be a sukkah, then they would it would appear that, again, it'd be logical to suggest that the Rabbanan would say a house which is less than 4 by 4 is still considered to be a house, and all relevant halachas would apply to it. It'd have to have a sukkah, it'd have to have a guardrail, etc., etc. It would be included in the Eruv, etc., etc. Says the Gemara. So that's the logical. That would seem logical. Says the Gemara though. I feel a tema Rabbanan. No, we can also say that this brisa goes according to the Rabbanan. And what we'll say is this: Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbanan hachi. This is the word Hasam. Look on the left hand side in the margin. It says Sarachloma hacha, not here but there. There in the Mishnah, they said up to now they'd said 4 by 4. Sorry, in the brisa over there in Eruvin, Rabbanan would say everything has to be 4 by 4, and if a house is less than that, then those halachos don't apply. Sukkah to diras arahi, but when it comes to a sukkah, which is only a temporary dwelling, that's when they would say it doesn't need to be 4 by 4. Sorry. In our Mishnah, when the Chachamim say, no, a sukkah can be less than 4 by 4. Why do they say that? Because it's a temporary dwelling. It doesn't need to have such big dimensions. Aval legabe bayis. However, in relation to a house, the diras kevahu, but when it comes to a house, which is a permanent dwelling, afilu rabbanan modeh, even the rabbis would agree. The isbei dalad amas al dalad amas. They would say that as long as it's got 4 by 4, it's fine. Direbei inshe, because people will live in such a house. But if it doesn't have a minimum of 4 by 4, even the rabbanan would say no. Why lo dairi bei inshe? Because people wouldn't live in such a small house. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah? So
yes,
we can at the moment we can say that the brisa goes according to the Rabbanan. Because the Rabbanan, the reason, and we make a distinction. When it comes to sukkah, since sukkah is a temporary dwelling, Rabbanan will say If it's small, it's small. It's not, it's only for 7 days. People can manage for 7 days in a temporary dwelling like that. When you go camping, it doesn't have to be, the biggest tent, right? But when it comes to a house people don't live in. It wouldn't be considered to be habitable unless it's a minimum of 4x4. And therefore, if it is less than 4x4, it doesn't have the din, the status of a bias, and therefore the normal halachas that apply to a bias wouldn't apply to such a place.
So this 4x4 designation for a house is nothing to do with the measurements which were given for sukkah, right? It's some other criterion altogether, right? Where did this 4x4 come from?
About what, the house or the sukkah?
Yeah, I'm talking about the house. Nothing to do with the sukkah, is it? The sukkah has different designations.
Yeah. Well, so what happened was that we learned previously that Rebbe had said in 2 brises that unless the sukkah is 4x4, it's not kosher. We then say, well, hold on. Oh, that's interesting. We've got a brisa in Eruvin that talks about a house which is less than 4x4. I wonder whose opinion does that brisa reflect? It would make sense that it reflects the opinion of Rebbe, because Rebbe had said that a sukkah which isn't 4x4 is not considered to be a sukkah, and therefore it would be logical to say, well, then by extension, Rebbe would also say that a house which isn't 4x4 isn't a house.
Yes, so it's the same source. You're saying it's from the same source or not?
Not from the same source. But what we're saying is the same logic.
Okay.
The logic of Rebbe, which is a sukkah which isn't 4x4 isn't considered a sukkah, could be the same logic for why a house which isn't 4x4 isn't considered to be a house.
That's what I'm asking. So it's not the same designation, though, is it?
No, it's not based on the same. It's not based on the same sources, but the same logic, which is you have to have a minimum dimensions of something for something to be considered substantial. According to Rebbe, for the sukkah to be kosher, substantial, it has to be substantial enough that it's 4x4. Similarly, we could suggest, well, people maybe say that same thing about a house. For a house to be considered a house, it has to be substantial. It has to be habitable. And unless it's 4x4, it's not habitable. Yeah, because that's not necessarily the conclusion you need to draw. Because perhaps the Rabbanan would say, look, okay, when it comes to the sukkah, we can be, it's only for 7 days, it's temporary, it can be small. But when it comes to a house has to be, it's a permanent dwelling place, it has to have a minimum dimensions, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't have the din of a house, and the halachas that we've seen that apply to normal size houses wouldn't apply to this very small house. To share with you a quick Ritva on this, says the Ritva, Man Tana, we said, who's this Brisa going according to? We said the Tana Rabbanan by Shem. We said perhaps it's the Rebbe. He said, no, it could also be the Rabbanan. Perish, V'daka Kari Lai, Sabat Afal Gav, the Rabbanan Diras Arai Bai. Even though when it comes to a sukkah, the rabbis require it to be temporary, B'inyan sukkah, Ilav de Chazia Ledira Lo Have Makshari. You may say, even though the sukkah itself is meant to be temporary, perhaps there's temporary and there's temporary. Yeah, that even though it's temporary, it still has to be habitable. You can't have, we know the Sona Halakas will see that reply to a sukkah, which means it can't be so temporary, so flimsy, for it to be. If it's too flimsy, then it's not kosher. So there's degrees of temporariness. If it's so temporary that it will be blown away, for example, if the walls are so flimsy they will be blown in a regular wind, then it's not kosher because that's too temporary. It has to have a certain element of permanence to it, as Riva says, it has to have that resemblance of a dwelling. So sukkah is temporary, yes, but it can't be so temporary that it doesn't even resemble a dwelling. So, it can't be just a blanket stuck up on 2 poles. Yeah, like when kids you do, kids used to make that like a in the living room, right? Yeah, they get a blanket into whatever the back of chairs and hang it. That's not, you can't suggest that's a sukkah, right? It's too temporary, it's too flimsy. But there's a definition of how permanent it should be. Now, Kudurabanan, okay, it has to have a certain amount of dwellingness to it, if it's not such a word, but it doesn't need to be dimensionally as big as 4x4. Whereas Rebbe would say no. For it to have this concept of a dira, it had to be 4x4. So we see again, there's different degrees of temporariness and permanence in terms of dwellings. Okay, so let's go back in the Gemara. Okay, we're now going to go each one by one. Rashi said that the Gemara will explain each one of these halachas in relation to into this small house, why the halachas, the normal halachas of a house don't apply to it. The first one was, we said it's potter from mezuzah. Says the Gemara, see where the two dots are. Amama. So the teacher of the Brisa said, potter min mezuzah. It's exempt from mezuzah, umina ma'akeh, and from a guardrail. Ve'ei matame ben negaim. Nor can its walls become tame with tzaras. Nor does it have the din of a house in a walled city that would revert to its original owner, only if he bought it back in the first year, and at the over, but not at the overall. Nor does it return a soldier from war. Says the Gemara. Ask the Gemara, my timer. What's the reason? Why does a house which is less than 4x4 not? These halachas don't apply to it. Says the Gemara, Debayis kasiv bahu b'kulu. Because when the Torah talks about all of these mitzvahs or halachas, it uses the term bayis. It calls it a house, and this isn't a house. Look at Rashi. So since the Torah specifically says the word house, it has to be a house, meaning it has to have the minimum dimensions of a house. And since 4x4 isn't, then these halachas don't apply. Look at Rashi. Kula bayis ksiv bahu. Mezuzos. So we know when mezuzah it says, we know the Shema. Mezuzos veisecha, the doorpost of your house. So it has to be a house. House has to be 4x4.
The people are very poor. Surely, isn't that undignified, not allowing them to put up a mezuzah? Surely that's against the sort of an ethical behavior of the Torah. It's discriminatory. It's I don't know. It's belittling. People are poor, very poor. Let's imagine. Can't afford it.
What about women not wearing tefillin? Is that demeaning to women that they don't wear tefillin?
I don't know. It depends how women feel. I don't know. I'm not a woman, so I don't know how they feel.
Okay, but of course it's not, because the Torah doesn't require them to. The Torah requires, let's look at it in this way. The Torah requires us to put a mezuzah on a house. If you don't have a house, you don't have to put mezuzah. One of the person doesn't have a house.
So patur mezuzah, okay.
Potter, yes. Yeah, they're potter. They don't have the chiyuv. They're not mechuyab. They don't have. It's again. It's this idea of
obligation.
Obligation. Well, what's the obligation on? Is it on the person? Is it chiyuv gavra or chiyuv chepsa? Yeah, is it Mrs. Gavra or Mrs. Chepsa? Mr. Gavra is, I have a mitzvah to learn Torah, right? We will have a mitzvah to learn Torah. Mitzvah of mezuzah, I don't have a mitzvah of mezuzah unless I have a house to put it on, because the Torah says, Al mezuzos beisecha. It doesn't say that, I don't know, I can't think of the Lashon, but we don't say that, the Torah doesn't say that you have to affix a mezuzah to yourself, or a person has to have a mezuzah or place a mezuzah. It says, you shall write these words on the doorposts of your house and your gates. Okay, let's take a person who's got a house. They've got a beautiful house. Yeah, a large house. They have to put mezuzahs on it, right? But their house doesn't have any gates. You think, oh, that's demeaning to them. What a poor person, they haven't got a gate. It's upsetting. Let them put it on.
No, that's not obviously not the case here. We're talking about someone who cannot afford to build what's regarded in the Torah as a house.
Right, and therefore they're potter.
Okay.
It's not. I said it's a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah on the gabra. It's a mitzvah on the chefsa. If you have a house of a minimum dimension, look, Johnny, I hear what you're saying, but you have to understand that everything has a minimum dimensions, right?
So is it like saying if you have a garment with 4 corners, you got to put tzitzit on it? If
Right.
you don't have a garment with 4 corners, it doesn't mean you have to wear tzitzit every day.
Exactly. Al Pitora, yes, you're right.
But at the same time, presumably you've got a small property that's less than 4x4. There's no reason why you couldn't put mezuzah on it if you wanted to. It's just not the obligation that you have to.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to make the bracha shekel shana because you're not, you know, we're not, you don't have a siva, you're not required to. Yeah, it's nothing to stop you. It's not osa, it's not forbidden, it's potter.
If you couldn't afford a house that big, you couldn't afford the mezuzahs probably. Probably for the best.
You beat me to it, Ben. I was just about to say that.
I think the bigger problem would be that the doors wouldn't be big enough to put the mezuzah on.
You'd have little mezuzahs.
Yeah, but you see the distinction.
Johnny, you can look at it like that, like this. Instead of it being demeaning that you can't have a mezuzah, you could say it's actually an act of compassion to Hashem. If you're too poor, if your mum is too poor to have a big a house measuring above amos, then you're part of from mezuzah. You don't have to have the expense of getting mezuzah. So
yes, you can always give an answer. I mean, there's always one way of putting it to make it sound respectable. Yes.
There you go.
And I wish I could see you. I think you're patur for mezuzah because you can't see your screen.
I think I mean, Jacob, that's a nice way of putting it. It's a nice way of putting it. The Torah is having rachmanos on you, which is, since you live in such a small house, you're exempt.
That's what I said.
But that's not the kavanah of the Torah. The Torah says, the Torah says you should put it on the mezuzah of your house. If you don't own a house, and then by extension, Chaim come along and say, if your house isn't big enough to be considered a house, you're exempt. We don't require you. Like you said with the tzitzis. Yeah, if you don't have tzitzis, you can't. Let's take another example. Let's say, shofar. The shofar halakha is you've got to bow certain notes on the shofar. What happens if a person can't make those sounds on the shofar? Yeah, he has to give it to someone else who can do it. Not. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. So
here we are. Now we can see him.
Oh, yeah, turn it off, Jacob. Let's carry on. Back in Rashi, so that was the first thing. That was when we do the mezuzah. It says beisecha, mezuzah beisecha. What was the next one? Ma'akeh, a guardrail. We have a din of guardrail. What happens if you haven't got a flat roof that requires a guardrail? Do you have to build a flat roof in your house? Yeah, is that why Jewish people love having through rooms? And it gives them a chance of having a flat roof somewhere. Yeah, it's like shluach haken. The mitzvah of shluach haken, sending away the mother bird. If you don't happen upon a mother bird and its eggs, you don't have to go out looking for it. Yeah, some people do. Some people make, obviously, otherwise you never get the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah. Only if the mitzvah presents itself to you are you required to fulfill it. There are certain mitzvahs we can't fulfill because we don't have the opportunity. Yeah,
right.
But you're right. You're right that we have to appear before Hashem 3 times a year. Not applicable to us at the moment, unfortunately, because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. Yeah, so certain things we're exempt from if you're not in that situation. So if you haven't got a guardrail, if you haven't got a flat roof that needs a guardrail, you don't put a guardrail. You don't have that mitzvah. Here, the house isn't big enough for you to put a guardrail. Why? Because the Torah says, "Kisivne bayis chadash." When you build a new house, yeah. It's called house again. It doesn't have the din of a house.
So to go back to the relevance of a sukkah, if it's 4x4 before it's constituted as a house, then the 4x4 analogy is also constituted as a sukkah kasherah, right? I mean, if you're using the same analogy, it's nothing to do with a house, though. This just happens to be the same dimensions which are used for a sukkah, because the sukkah is not a house. We know that.
Right. Yeah. According to Rebbe, Rebbe would say, although a sukkah is diras arai, it's temporary dwelling, it has to be ka'ein diras keva. It has to somehow resemble a permanent dwelling,
and therefore it's the same dimensions. That's the argument.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's logical.
But Rebbe didn't make that connection. We're making that connection. We're saying since we have a brisa where Rebbe says one thing and the dimensions are 4x4, and there's another brisa where the dimensions are 4x4, perhaps it reflects both of his opinions. We said not necessarily. It could also reflect the opinions of the rabbis as well. Even though they don't require 4x4 sukkah, because they don't require it to be that much of a dwelling, it can be much more temporary according to them. When it comes to a house, they would agree, no, it has to be minimum size. Everything has a minimum size. You know, the amount of matzah you eat on Pesach, the length of the shofar notes, the size of your lulav, everything has a minimum dimension. So does a house, but they have the din of a house. A house which isn't 4x4 is not considered to be a house, but therefore you're exempt from sukkah, from mezuzah, because that talks about a house. You're exempt from a guardrail, because the pasuk says, when you build a new house. What's the next thing? What was the next thing? Let's look at the list again. And the house wouldn't be susceptible to ra'as. Pasuk says in Vayikra, Uva shelo habayis, the person who has the house will come to the Kohen. Will apply, it says bias again. Again, the relation to selling and rebuying houses, says the pasuk in Vayikra, bias moshav. When you sell a house in a moshav, in a settlement, not that type of settlement. And then we've got the soldier. And then you've got the soldier. No process. Then we've got the soldier. Asher bana bias chadash is in devarim. The person who's built a new house, he's exempt from military service. Yeah. So we see each one of those. The Torah itself mentions the word bias. It says the word house, and since it makes the point of saying house, we are saying the definition of a house is 4x4. If it doesn't meet that definition, those mitzvahs don't apply.
Is that called a gezerah shavah? Is that the phrase used, or what application would you use from the Ne'emarei Rabbi Yishmael? Which one of those would apply? You're talking about the word bias. The word bias is the key here. Yeah,
a hekesh. We're comparing.
Okay.
Since it says house, and we're saying a house is 4x4 minimum, what we're saying is that if it's not 4x4, it doesn't have the din of a house. The Torah specified it has to be a house for these things to apply to it, and if it's not, then these things don't apply to it.
Right.
Okay, that's those first four then. Back in the Gemara. Where were we? My time of device, Kasiv, the next things we said, the Ein Ma'arvin boy, this house, this small house does not require joining in on the Erev Chatzeres. The Mishtasvin boy, nor does it need to join in becoming partners in the Mavoy, in the alleyway. The Manichim boy Erev, nor do you place the Erev in this house. You don't deposit the Erev in this house. My time, asked the Gemara, why not? Says the Gemara, because a house smaller than 4x4 is not suitable for dwelling. And this is all about dwelling. Okay, look at Rashi. Show it to you. It's not suitable for dwelling. The time of the Eruvim of Farish Be'eruvin. And the whole reason for making an Eruv to join up the Chatzeros, the Chatzer with all the other batim, is brought down in the Gemara in Eruvin, which says Mishum dira de bayishnosin noha pas shel eruv. So why do we make the eruv? On account of those who dwell in the houses, they give the bread of this eruv. And they deposit it in one house, and it makes it as if everyone is living in one big communal house. And therefore it changes the reality, which is we then find that everybody is using this one courtyard, but this courtyard is actually being used by one house, not multiple houses, because all the multiple houses have become like one. Hilkach, bayis deroy ledira ba'inan. Therefore, since it's all about dwelling in one, making it as if we're dwelling in one house, therefore the house itself has to be suitable for dwelling. Upasnami einu sarach litin. And therefore, if it's not big enough for dwelling in, it's not required to be part of this Eruv. And then finally, Rashi makes the second point, Upasnami einu sarach litin. And the householder of this small house also doesn't have to give the bread to the mikre dira, because his house is not called a dwelling. Ein hada boy ose al bnei chatzer she'enu shesuklu. And the person who dwells in it can't stop the other people of the courtyard because he has no authority over it. He has such a small stake in this courtyard, it's completely insignificant. Therefore, he doesn't need to give bread. And also, him not giving bread does not prevent them using the courtyard. He's completely insignificant in terms of this courtyard. It's just like somebody who's, I don't know, again, living in a cardboard box. Yeah? Someone is sleeping in a cardboard box in Trafalgar Square. No one would suggest, oh, he owns Trafalgar Square. Right? And he will have reshus over it, and no one else can go into Trafalgar Square because he's living there. No. Yeah, what he's living in isn't of any sufficient significance for it to be considered in any way impinging on the rights of others of that area. The same here as well. Okay, back in the Gemara, we've got a couple more things to look at. Just what we saw from the Brisa. My time's a lot of yeah. Says the Gemara, something we just have to infer from this. We said, here you can see where the asterisk is. Sorry, the cursor. Eruvi chatzeros ein manichim boy. So the Brisa said that not only does he not need to contribute to the Eruv, but the Eruv that's been collected from everybody else is not deposited in his house. Aval shituf manichim boy, my timer. But when we said he doesn't need to be included in the shituf mavoi, where he doesn't need to be included in the partnership of the alleyway, we didn't say, and equally, you don't place the Eruv in his house when it comes to the mavoi. Just look back. I don't want to turn back the page, but if you just go back the page at the bottom of the last page, yeah? Look at the penultimate line. We said, Ein ma'arvim boy, we don't make an Eruv with him. Ein mishtasrim boy, we don't join with him. He doesn't need to join together for the mavoi. But ein manichim boy Eruv, said the Brisa, and you don't place the Eruv chatzeros in his house. But it doesn't say you can't place the shituf mavoi in his house. Do you understand the point of what I was asking? What's the distinction? Why do you not place the Eruv chatzeros in his house? We know that because it said it's all about dwelling. But why can you therefore then place the shituvei mavos in his house? Why would you say you could do that? Says the Gemara, because the truth is, his small house is no worse than the courtyard which is in the in the alleyway, or connected to the alleyway. Look at is that Rashi here? 1 second. Yeah. Look at Rashi. The Logara Mechat says she was at where the cursor is. She'ein Makora doesn't have a roof. So this tiny house is no worse than the courtyard, which is completely open. And we're going to see a brisa from Eruvin, which says you could actually place the Shituvim Mavos in the Chatzeh itself. So, and this house therefore is no worse than the Chatzeh. Okay, let's just go back. We'll leave that Rashi for a minute because it's late. Let's just go back to the Gemara.
So can you just remind me, the Shituf is what's the difference between the Shituf and the?
Is to join the courtyards to the communal alleyway.
Okay.
Yeah, you're becoming partners with the alleyway that joins the courtyards to the main street.
Okay.
Okay.
And you can't do that by joining them all together with one big Eruv because they're not all on the same courtyard. So it's a way of joining multiple courtyards.
Courtyards, yeah. The multiple houses are joined to the courtyard.
Yeah.
And the courtyards are joined to each courtyard with the alleyway.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And we're making a distinction. We're saying that you can't place the Erev Chatzeros, the courtyards, in this small house, but it would appear that you could put the Shtuvei Mavos in this small house. But why? Because it's no worse than placing it in the courtyard itself. And says the Gemara, quoting this brisa in Eruvin, Desnan, although it says Desnan is actually a brisa here, it says in Eruvin, Pei Hey, on the base, Eruvin Chaserus, the Chatzeh, the Erev Chaserus, the joint collection of bread for the courtyards can be actually placed in the courtyard itself. It can be left in the courtyard. It doesn't need to be within the house. Shituvim Mavoi, the Mavoi, and the collection to join the alleyway can be left in the alleyway. So we see that placing in the small house is no worse than placing it in the courtyard. So that's why the collection for the alleyway could be placed in the small house, but the collection for the courtyard can't be. Says the Gemara, hold on a second. But then on that brisa, we actually asked a question in Eruvin. Eruvi Chatzeres b'Chatzeh. The brisa said that you can place the collected bread for the courtyards in the courtyard itself. Really? V'hatanan, but we've learned in a Mishnah. Hanosin Eruvi by the base sha'a. If you place the collected bread, the Eruv, in a gatehouse, and we'll see Rashi says the gatehouse is it says what it is. It's a small little structure, either inside the walls or outside the walls, where the guard sits. It's a guard post. It's a small little guard sentry post.
The guy we have in our shul.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. That's right. It's a little portal cabin. Thank you. Yeah. Achsadra. If you place it in an achsadra, which is, says Rashi, which is like a portico. Shilifneha baya shikorin portica in Old French. Yeah, portico, the porch. Yeah, not a Porsche, but a porch. A big difference. Yeah. I remember once someone was giving me a letter years ago, and I said, which house do you live in? I said, it's the one with the white porch. He said, oh, no need to show off. I said, no, porch, not Porsche. Anyway, so if you place it under the Porsche, no, sorry, I'm losing that. Portico, umipeset, or umipeset. Now, modern mimpeset is like a balcony, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now, in terms of tomorrow, it was also a balcony, but this was a continuous balcony that went all the way around the courtyard. That it was a communal balcony. Very much what you see sometimes flats above, let's say particularly like above shops or things like that. They have like one staircase that goes up, and then you walk along, you see often in, well, I can't call them council houses anymore, you call them social housing. They have a communal walkway on each level, and then each door goes onto it, but one set of stairs to go to each. This is what we're talking about. It's a joint balcony. Let me pass that. Ein Erev, says the Mishnah. If you put the Erev itself, meaning the collective bread, under any of these, in the guardhouse, or underneath a portico, or on the balcony, there's not an Erev. It's not where you put it. Why? V'hadasham ein oseh. Because anyone living there in any of these places can't prevent anyone coming through them. They don't have a enough significance to impact on the shared areas. So that how can you say that you can place the Eruv in the Chotzer? So says the Gemara, Ela Ema. Well, what we should say is Eruv Chatzeris bebayis shebachotzer. What we meant to say was that the Eruv Chatzeris, the collected bread for the courtyard, has to be placed in one of the houses of that courtyard. And the joint ownership of the alleyway, has to be placed in the courtyard of that alleyway. And that's why this small house is no worse than the courtyard in the alleyway. And therefore, that's why, although you can't place the Eruv Chatzeris, the bread collected for the courtyard, in this small house, because it has no connection to the courtyard, you could place the collected bread that was used to join the alleyway in this small house, because it's no worse than placing it in the courtyard itself, a place which is totally open to the elements and has no din of a dira, has no definition of dwelling to it whatsoever.
Is this important? I mean, obviously you get overlap in many masechtot from one to another, but this is now all to do with Eruvin. Surely that could all be pushed aside unless there's nothing about Sukkah here which is relevant, is it? We're not talking about Sukkah anymore.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right. 6 lines up from the bottom of the previous onward, we went off on a tangent. That's how Gemara works.
I know it happens all the time. Yes, I know, yeah. But surely there's enough discussed in Eruvin or not, or is this extra to Eruvin, which makes it more relevant?
No, we basically quoted word for word from Eruvin.
Yes.
We've not added anything to our understanding of Eruvin.
Okay.
All we've done is we've said, well, while we were talking about subject X, let's also talk about subject Y, because there's a connection between them.
Unless Rashi or Tosfot are giving more contribution, which wasn't existing in Eruvin.
No.
You know that. I mean, that's.
No, I'm not claiming I know that. I'm suggesting that this is not the place for it. But all we've done is we've literally, if you can think about the Gemara as a cut and paste job, what it's done is, so hold on a second, Rabbeinu Rash Ashi, who were the redactors of the Gemara, had encyclopedic knowledge of all of this material, not only Mishnah and Gemara, but the Brises as well, those things which were going to be left out as well. They had all, and they knew, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight a piece of text there, right click it, copy it, and I'm going to paste it over here. Okay?
Yes.
And that's all we've done, because since we were talking about something which is tangentially connected to it, well, let's talk about it now as well. Okay. We'll leave it there, Mr. Shem. Next time we had one more thing to go talk about, which was this pregnant protrusion that joined up the Tchumim. So we'll pick it up from there, Mr. Shem, next time. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.
One question.
Thank you very much.
Sure,
what was a shittoff? Was it a piece of bread again from each of the residents, or was it just one?
Yeah. Shittoff is affected again in exactly the same way by collection from each of the residents of the Chotzer, in order to join their Chotzer to the in fact, it doesn't have to be that, because it's courtyard to courtyard, so it would be like almost like they wouldn't have to each give a piece of bread, but they'd have to, they need to, for example, contribute to a collective purchase of something, and then join that up with the collective purchase of something from the other courtyards, join up their alleyways.
Okay, so it could be one thing from courtyard A and one from courtyard B.
One per courtyard. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
No, thank you, everybody. Keep well. Take care.
Thank you very much.